Today, I'm going to be speaking with John Jorgenson. He is the Chief Marketing Officer at Cambium Learning Group since 2019. His leadership has been crucial in shaping the company's marketing strategies and enhancing its brand presence in the K-12 education sector. Cambium Learning Group is known for its innovative educational technology solutions and services, aiming to support educators and students through a diverse portfolio of brands, including Learning A to Z, Lexia Learning, and Voyager Soprius Learning. Welcome, John. Look forward to talking to you.
Oh, thanks, Darshan. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So I'm curious, you have quite an experience, many years in education, but how did you get started? What are the aha moments that inspired you or impacted you to eventually get into the education sector and in marketing in particular?
Yeah, so there's a lot in that. Well, I started off in college. I was an English major and thought the whole time I was in college I was going to be an English professor. And then by the time graduate school was supposed to start, it was all ready to go. I said, yeah, I don't think I want to do that. And so, like a lot of liberal arts majors, I graduated wondering, am I qualified to do anything? And somebody suggested that I look at publishing, and so I ended up getting into publishing as an editor, and then I did product development work, and then that led to creative work, which led to strategic marketing and branding. So I've been in strategic marketing and branding now for many, many years, but it was never intended. I never studied to do it. And yet, as I look back and I look back at all of the things that I was training to do as a writer and editor, as somebody who was a liberal arts major, so much of it is relevant. And I'm just so grateful that that path led me to where I am today, even though that was never the plan.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've found that I've met a lot of people in marketing that actually have a liberal arts background. And I think it's helped them because of various things, critical thinking, but also learning to communicate. And that's a big part of, I think, what we all do in marketing. I don't mean just, talking to our customers and clients, but also listening part of it, right? And really understanding and then being able to articulate that in writing and then ultimately in messaging and stuff. So are there particular moments when you realize, hey, this background and when I'm getting into marketing, like an aha moment to say, this is really what is my calling.
It really happened kind of after I had been in marketing for a little while, and it coincided with when I made the move to Learning A to Z. And in 2009, I just got talking to the founder of Learning A to Z and just heard his story of former educator, like a lot of founder stories. Former educator, got really frustrated that he didn't have what he needed in the classroom, saw a need for something, and created it. It had never existed before. And as I worked with him, his name is Bob Hall. He's now retired. As I worked with Bob over the years, I had there were kind of two big aha moments I had that were related to both marketing and to business, really. And so on the marketing side, Bob used to have this amazing way of being in a room with his senior leadership team, and anytime a question would come up about strategy or business, just new ideas related to the business, Bob would kind of, sort of sit back in his chair, and he'd sort of, look up at the ceiling, and he'd say, okay, hold on a second. All right, so I'm a teacher. And that would be, he would like ground himself in the recognition that teachers were why we existed. And so he had to think like a teacher to make sure the things we were doing. And this wasn't just, new product development stuff. This was like how we decided to interact as a business. Like if we're trying to help teachers, help them achieve their goals, then we had to put ourselves in that mindset. So as a marketer, that was a really powerful moment where I realized that it's really easy to get off in all these tangents and dive into your analytics and your data and all of that. But if you can never get too far away from remembering who it is that you're serving, which is the second aha moment related to that was more of a business thing where I recognize that growth and scale and profitability and discipline and just running a good business is more than just responsible and making sure that people have jobs and that you're running a good business. It is your path to impact. So if you don't scale, your impact is always going to be limited. And so that changed the way we even talked about, forecasts and sales and, quarterly financial targets and profitability and those things, where those things became intertwined with how we were going to help, achieve the purpose we had as an organization. So those were two really powerful moments. Prior to that, I had worked in the nonprofit sector. I was sort of jaded with corporate America. I wanted to do something that I thought was more, mission driven, and certainly it was. But at the same time, nonprofits have all the same challenges that for-profit organizations. And when I met somebody like Bob and recognized how passionate he was about helping teachers, and also understood the need to run a business really effectively, and to have real discipline when he did that. Um, I recognized that it wasn't an either or, that there was a way to have that kind of impact, and be driven by that kind of mission, at a for-profit company, just as long as you're with the right people.
Yeah. You brought up an interesting point about strategy. And I wonder, how often do you find that people think or say they're talking about strategy, but in reality, they're talking about tactics?
Very often, and not even just tactics, but they can dive. And I see this with marketers often, where they can just dive into their performance. So, and I'm not talking, vanity metrics where they're, taking one half of something. Oh, well, it's growth, but it's growth of, half a percent or something like that. It really has. I see a lot of examples where there's just such an emphasis on the process, and on the analytics that are being looked at to determine, is this successful or not. And I think so often, to be able to take that step back. I mean, that's often my role in those conversations, is I can, and there can be great work happening, and there are great things they should be proud of, but I can take a step back and say, okay, but why are you doing that? What's the result of that? Even beyond, and sometimes I'm just talking about, like, how is that getting through the funnel, and actually resulting in dollars at the other end. That's kind of the obvious one, but even strategically, it goes back to, like what Bob said, like, how is this helping teachers? How is what you're doing having an impact on the larger purpose we have for why we exist as an organization? So that, to me, is that's a big part of what my role is to help ground people in that conversation, and not forget that, because we're all very busy, and it's high pressure, and it's demanding, and you're trying to deliver on your part of the, what the team's doing. But you can get lost in that, and it's easy for any of us to get lost in that. I can get lost in that, and so it's really important to be able to take that step back, and to say, wait a minute, why are we doing this? The so what question that comes up so often.
So I'm curious, how would you draw distinctions or give tips to someone on keeping the differences between branding, strategy, and tactics?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think brand is the story that you're telling, and that's something that isn't just about how you're presenting your brand to the market. It's internal as well. So making sure that everybody internally understands that this brand is something that they are working on behalf of, and that what they do matters, and that what we do as a collective matters. And so that role as a kind of brand ambassador or brand evangelist, all these different terms people use to describe the kind of work we do. It is about making sure that people see themselves in what they're doing, and see that it's something that's meaningful. Why would the world care if Cambium, suddenly didn't exist? Would they care? And if we're not sure about that, we need to look hard at that, to make sure that we understand why it is we do what we do, and how we do it in a way that's unique and would be missed, and all of that. So brand is all about engaging people in that why you exist story.
It's also about what personality you want with your brand, correct? What are the attributes you want to associate with the brand? Because I think that now when you get into strategy, I think the distinctions will be even greater, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so you can't lose sight of who this brand is for. Yes, the employees are a part of the fabric, and you have to make sure that you're thinking about them. But the personality of the brand has to be true and authentic to who you really are, but it also has to be relevant to the people that you're trying to engage. So those things. So we do that when we do brand projects. We do a lot of discovery, and when we come out of the discovery and we create all of the creative assets, and start to build that and build momentum for it, we think about all of those things. What are the brand pillars? What is the brand personality? What's the brand voice? How does the visual identity reflect all of that as well, not just the words?
And interesting enough, a lot of it is what you're not. right? I mean, a lot of it is deciding what you're not going to be, right?
And what you're not going to be, but also not being afraid to say this is who we are and who we are not, because so often we see this in a lot of industries. Education isn't unique to this, but you could pull purpose statements or mission statements or kind of statements of values and vision, those kinds of things from a wide variety of organizations in an industry, and you just start to see they just all start to blend together because everybody's trying to make sure that make sure we're able to connect to this stakeholder group and that stakeholder group. And I think it is difficult sometimes for brands to be willing to stand for something and to be willing to not pursue something just because it's an opportunity, if in fact it's not in alignment with what they're all about. So I think that's a really good point. When I think about strategy, I do think if your purpose is kind of why you exist and that's sort of the underpinning of the brand, then the strategy becomes, well, what are we trying to accomplish? Who cares about this brand? Like, what is it that we're trying to do? And then the tactics are, okay, well, this is how we do it. So there's a bit of a why, a bit of a how underneath that. And so I think it is important to have. I always think about these things in very and maybe this is part of being the English major of, making connections and making arguments and kind of organizing arguments and thoughts. But I think very architecturally about those three things you just asked me about, with a brand hierarchy that kind of informs everything. The strategy, or I always think of them as like these buckets that are kind of these priorities that we're focused on. And then, well, how are you going to do that? And making sure that those tactics, as much as you can possibly make sure that you are ruthless about examining them, measuring them, and if they're not performing, be willing to change your mind and do something else. But it's because it's always connected to that strategy and then connected to that brand, that purpose. It gives you that flexibility to try different things and not feel like you're just sort of scrambling to find something that works.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think a lot of times it gets lost that you can get caught up in excitement and interesting things with tactics, but you need to make sure they align with your strategy and, of course, with your brand at the same time. And those are two distinct things. So I agree, and I think that's always a kind of a tough thing to do because it is fun and exciting to do with the tactics, but they really need to fit the overall umbrella of both the other two pillars.
All of them are important. If one of them isn't functioning, then the whole thing kind of collapses. It's sort of this three-legged stool that won't stand upright anymore. So I don't mean to diminish tactics as if it's like the third most important thing. The tactics are. I love getting into the tactics because that's where the rubber meets the road. It's making sure that you're spending money in the right ways, spending your time in the right ways, paying attention to the right things, and then constantly, being willing to say, you know what, that's not. I thought that was a great idea. It worked for a while, but now it's not working anymore. So we need to think differently about it and not be stubborn with the tactics.
So I'm curious. I'm sure you've been in this industry for 25 years. Was there a sea change in educational environment post COVID? And if so, how?
It's difficult to say that something happened kind of post COVID because I think a lot of things were starting to change even before COVID happened in terms of the adoption of technology and the way technology has evolved, the infrastructure that supports technology, but then the technology products themselves. We are an ed tech company, so our strategy is all about how do we address the greatest needs in K-12 education. Things like literacy proficiency and professional learning for teachers and assessment and making sure there's access for education for everybody, even if it's not a traditional school. We have a homeschool education or a home education brand that's part of our portfolio, which is a little unusual for a company like ours. And so we identified what these really big challenges were, and the reason I'm hesitant to say a sea change has happened is because these are challenges that have been around for a long time. These are like one of our presidents describes them as like decades long efforts that we have to be willing to continue to work at and get better at. Technology can accelerate it. Things like AI that has really emerged kind of as we've come out of the pandemic. That's something that is rapidly transforming everything. And so there is a bit of a sea change in terms of AI as a component of education technology. But I think what happened with COVID was you had suddenly all of these educators that had to figure out how to do what they do, but the way we're talking today on Zoom, and so to be able to do that required a lot of new thinking, a lot of new tools, and so there was a lot of adoption and a lot of funding coming in from the federal government with stimulus funding, and so there was a lot of investment and a lot of new things coming in as they scrambled just to deliver what they needed to deliver. Coming out of the pandemic, that is starting to almost kind of, I don't want to say return to where it was because it's in a completely different place, but one of the things that we are experiencing is, and a lot of companies are experiencing is, as schools are coming out of the pandemic, as funding is starting to, normalize, as teachers are starting to feel overwhelmed with all of the wealth of things that they were trying. They were trying so many things just to deliver learning experiences. They're looking for something that's a bit quieter and simpler and more streamlined. And so companies like ours are trying to make sure that we're delivering that for them, that we're not just adding more chaos to their classrooms. And so in some ways, the same challenges exist. We still have literacy, proficiency, and STEM proficiency, real issues in this country that aren't going to be solved this year or next year. They're going to take years of time and investment to make an impact. And things like professional learning for teachers, those things have not changed. And technology isn't a new thing, but it really did accelerate during the pandemic, and that hasn't slowed down since.
So I think what you're saying, a lot of those things are not a function of the medium. It's just they're challenges that are always going to exist to a degree, anyways, right? And if anything, technologies, well, up to a point. I think it'd be great to have a 100% literacy, but I'm not sure that's completely possible. I think even countries like Iceland, which have one of the highest rates of literacy, I'm not sure that 100%.
Right. Yeah. The pursuit of perfection is folly. It's all about just continuing to make progress and to continue to just widen access to education, which that's another issue that continues to be a real struggle as well, is there just isn't equal access to education in this country.
So I'm curious, what impact and what role are you seeing AI is playing in your industry now?
It's funny, we had that same question internally, and so we said, we started to talk about it, and we said, wait a minute, why are we talking about it? Let's go into the market and find out. And so we partnered with, one of our partners is Hanover Research, and we did a market study with them to better understand not just like how many teachers and administrators. We looked at both teachers and administrators, not just like how many of them are using AI, but for the ones that we focused on, the ones who are using it, and we wanted to better understand, like, what are they using it for, and how are they using it, because we felt that was both more interesting and something that would be more useful to the rest of the space to better understand. Okay, like, for the people that are using it, let's learn from them and see what's working and what's not working. And so there were two big categories that came up. One was not at all surprising, and the other one was a bit more, I would say, interesting, even though both are important. The not surprising one was just efficiency, the way that teachers and administrators can more efficiently run classrooms, schools, districts, able to use AI in a way to understand their data in a way that they couldn't before, a way to just manage classrooms with kind of more of the operational things that need to happen in the classroom. AI can be hugely helpful for that, and teachers and administrators both are looking for ways to do that. How can they do their administrative tasks more efficiently? So that wasn't surprising. I mean, we do the same thing, right? We're using things like ChatGPT to help with a presentation, or with so many things. But then the other part that I think is interesting, and this isn't, your question about the pandemic, this isn't new. There are products, including some at Cambium, that have been leveraging AI and machine learning for years now in order to make personalized learning experiences even better. And so what do I mean by that? Well, I think a lot of education technology historically has been, you figure out where a kid is, you put them into the flow, and they just start moving through a program. And so when they get something wrong, they continue to get, okay, well, let's try this, let's try that, and trying to move them along in a product to show their development. What AI is making even more available, again, it's not something that's new. There have been products that have had it for some time, but it's not just helping to adjust when a kid gets something wrong. It understands in a much more detailed way why a kid is getting something wrong, is able to adjust accordingly. So that level of like, what's really the issue here? Not just they keep getting the wrong answer, so keep giving them a new problem until they get a right answer. It's looking at how they're getting it wrong and then helping them work through that to develop those skills so that they can get a right answer if they get those skills mastered. So that's something that is just continuing to accelerate. And that level of a personalized learning experience is, this goes beyond efficiency and operational stuff for teachers and admins. This is about how kids are going to be able to have a learning experience that they wouldn't be able to have without this technology, not as a replacement for what they're doing, but as a way to just get to the end result more efficiently and without the frustration and the lack of understanding of, well, why is this kid just not getting this right? If you can understand that better, the underpinnings of it and the skills, which AI can really help with, then you can better. It's a better learning experience as well.
So if I hear you correctly, I think what I'm hearing is that with these new tools and the technology and then your platforms, you're going to be able to get to more personalized education. And that's going to be at a pace and at a level that you can actually make impact and progress with that individual. Is that an extra burden for the teachers, or actually it's not even that much of an extra burden, but it gives them more insights on how to tackle it for this particular individual?
Yeah, well, I think it's really helpful for the teachers because they better understand where a kid is really at. And so, again, it's not replacing the teacher. The teacher is still there to help guide the student through an experience. And education technology is just one way that students can. So, for example, we have a product at Explore Learning, one of our brands called Reflex, which is a math fact fluency product. So kids can learn their kind of foundational skills in elementary school, and the AI underpinnings of a product like that can really help guide a student efficiently so that they master those things quickly. Now, that doesn't mean that's all they need to learn, but if you don't have those foundational skills in STEM, not only is it going to be hard for the kid to do well in the class in general, but as they go forward into things like algebra, it's going to be impossible for them to do. So teachers understand this. They understand that these foundational skills are critical to helping them then guide them in other ways. And so they're grateful to have tools like that to help them kind of build that foundation so that they can focus on teaching the other things that are even harder to do and kind of longer term.
So it's almost like having an assistant to the teachers to help them analyze as well as maybe have a road path on how to overcome some of the challenges with that particular individual.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way that we often think about it. One other thing I would say about AI is, we're talking about kind of traditional running of classrooms and personalized learning for students. We're just like scratching the surface of other things. And I have one example for you that I think is just a really amazing, cool example. So Cambium Assessment is another one of our brands, and they do assessment for more than half of the states in the United States. And so they have a thing called Hotline, and this thing called Hotline is when students are doing kind of written parts of their assessments. They have AI that is in virtual real time looking at that writing that a student is doing and is looking for potential issues. And I don't mean learning issues, I mean safety issues, things related to indications of potential for self-harm, harming others, things that might be happening to the student, that kind of forms of abuse potentially. So the AI is, and this is something they would look for historically, but when you're doing kind of traditional written exams and hand scoring, it can take, weeks. And then by the time you might text something and you go back to the school or district to say, hey, we're seeing this issue, you should take a look at it. I mean, that can be too late for something, right? So this is something that happens in near real time now, and it's both amazing and terrifying, the results of something like this. The thousands of, when it sort of makes it through this process of looking at the writing in a given year, there are literally thousands of examples where Cambium assessment goes directly to the school, or the district or the state, and says, you need to intervene now. Um, and by doing that, it's difficult to quantify, well, what has it prevented or what has it helped? But we do know that there have been thousands of cases where we have indicated, make that intervention. And we've had feedback from people saying, the fact that this was in real time, and AI is how this is possible. The fact that this was in real time is something that could potentially, it's not overstating it to say it could be saving lives.
No, it sounds like it, especially when you're looking at the total picture of what's being influenced. And I mean, it depends on how you say saving lives, maybe from an immediate danger, but maybe even saving their lives to becoming more productive and more, talented later.
Yes, yeah, all of that, absolutely.
That's interesting because I was wondering because I figured part of becoming personalized, you'd have to have an assessment. But I guess the other benefit is now you actually have a baseline as well to see the progress and also create a path to get them to the goals that are desired.
That's right. Yeah, assessment is transforming rapidly. I think that, for many years, assessment was, you go to school all year, you do all your instruction, you do all your practice and your homework and tests and quizzes and all of that, and then at the end of the year, you have this big test, and that's sort of the big summative. Okay, where does this kid fall after this year of learning? That certainly, there is still a huge need for summative assessment like that, especially with standards in different states and all of that. But then there's this, again, because technology makes it possible to do these ongoing, formative assessments, interim assessments, being able to be monitoring how kids are doing as they're doing it within products, within the day to day, so that adjustments can be made immediately, not wait till the end of the year and say, wait a minute, what happened? Now what do we do? So I think that's assessment is, I think, often misunderstood as being just testing. And I think assessment, the way we think about it, is that assessment is a way of better understanding where a kid is at any given moment, so you can actually do something in the moment that matters.
Of course, if you think about it now, it makes sense, right? I mean, assuming in the old way that everybody starts from the same level or the same starting point is probably not the case, right? With an assessment, you realize the differences, and then that way, but maybe you can see the difference, but then come up with a plan that brings them a lot closer by the end of that particular time frame. And so, how accurate are you finding these assessments to be?
Oh, unbelievably accurate. So we could have an entire conversation. I could bring, psychometricians and data analysts from our Cambium assessment brand, and even other brands that we have that aren't assessment businesses, but have embedded assessments in their products. The level of sophistication, and the way it's so rapidly evolving as engines are being trained with data from actual students is something that is just remarkable and continues to evolve quickly.
So I'm sure a lot of these assessments could be used later on for employment as well, right?
Right now, we're so focused on helping in education. So certainly, the AI-driven assessment or AI-powered assessment is something that has so many use cases, including, workplace, training and development that certainly other businesses are doing today. So, I think that's a safe thing to assume.
So what do you see on the horizon that excites you about where education is potentially heading, or what things are on the horizon to further enhance the education realm?
Technology certainly is part of it. AI is part of it. Our purpose at Cambium is to help all teachers and students feel seen, valued, and supported. And so that kind of drives everything we do. All of our businesses are constantly looking to make sure, well, how is what we're doing in assessment or in STEM or in literacy? How are we helping that? How are we helping that purpose where students and teachers feel seen, valued, and supported? And so if we do that, then that's why we exist. And so you can't do that without thinking about the people. And so we have a product. It's called Letters. It does literacy training for teachers, and it's from Lexia. And that is a professional learning. It's a very robust training course to teach teachers how to teach literacy, so that using science of reading, using the most recent research. But it's still about people. It's still about people helping other people, and technology is part of it for sure. I think sometimes headlines can be vastly just overstated or just outright wrong when they seem to suggest that technology is going to be kind of this new way of learning that isn't going to need teachers, isn't going to need people to help develop not just the skill of the proficiency skill, but all of those skills around it. Goes back to what we talked about, for liberal arts majors. And so I increasingly am seeing the consideration of people alongside the growth of AI and technology being emphasized. And so, even as we're thinking about product development, we're often thinking about how can we impact people in their teaching craft, or how can we help students with a feeling of confidence and well-being and those kinds of things. So that to me is exciting because I think it takes education way beyond just kind of academic proficiency and performance, and it becomes more about how do you help grow people to be happy, healthy, capable. So it's a much more kind of holistic view of what education, uh, how we define education, and I think that's the right thing, and I think it's exciting.
Do you see marketing changing in terms of how you're going to be marketing in the future in the educational realm?
I mean, in some ways, it's always changing, and it's impossible to keep up. And a lot of that is related to the tactics that we talked about and the tools that make things possible that were never possible before. But at the same time, the importance of storytelling, the importance of emotion and brand, I think that those aren't going to change. Those are, I mean, as much as brand is kind of becoming more individual than before, and people identify with people and thought leaders and influencers, and that's becoming a bigger part of brand building. But I think that brand is still ultimately, again, when you take that step back, brand is about the story you have to tell and why people feel invested in it and care about it. I see that as still being what drives marketing. I also see the idea of purpose that I just mentioned with Cambium. That's something. Purpose and impact are things that are increasingly becoming important parts of those brand stories, so that people feel that this brand is not just doing a good job of selling products and running a successful business that employs people, but is doing something in the world that's needed, and is having an impact on things that the world needs and cares about. So I see that becoming an increasingly important part of brand, but I don't see brand becoming any less important just because things are becoming even more digital, more data driven. I see it all kind of happening at the same time.
Yeah, I'm sure using your own example, I'm sure your purpose and your brand story has changed once you learned the impact you've had with these assessments and may have actually saved, or certainly, if not saved, altered many lives, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So is there a personal area of interest that you have in education that you'd like to delve into further yourself?
Yeah, I love to learn, and this extends not just to marketing and kind of the professional work I do, but just better understanding um, how the potential of education. I mean, that's the place that we live in, and so I'm constantly learning as we do things. Like the last couple of years, we did an impact report for the first in 2022. We just released the 2023 edition in June. I continue to be amazed how we're thinking about impact and the kind of impact we're having, and the potential of education, again, to go beyond just making sure kids can do things so that they can perform jobs someday. But how do we think about education in a bigger way? How do we push ourselves to sort of challenge ourselves to think of education in a bigger way? I want to learn more about that. I want to dive into that a bit more to say, okay, well, how does a company like Cambium help with student well-being or teacher well-being in new ways? How can we think creatively about that? So that's something that I'm constantly trying to learn about, whether it's just talking to smart people, listening. As you mentioned, listening is even more important. That's part of my job, is to help better understand kind of, well, where is this going? And am I starting to see some connections or some things emerging that are needs? And I think it goes back to people. It goes back to understanding that people are not just students or just teachers, they are also people. So we have to make sure we're thinking about them in that way. And so I need to learn more about that, because for so long, we've been in this world of kind of proficiency, performance-based academic achievement. And as the world shifts, I want to learn more about it.
Yeah, well, I think learning to be human is a lifelong journey, right? And it never ends. So who in the world of marketing or educational marketing would you love to have lunch or dinner with, and why?
I think about this a little bit differently than I used to. So in the past, I would have thought about, who are those thought leaders that seem to be kind of on the forefront of innovation, and I would love to just pick their brain and talk to them. Still examples of that. I mean, there are people that are kind of those kinds of thought leaders in our space. But one thing that I sort of came to over the last couple of years was as I went to different events, I would always look up other CMOs from other ed tech companies, and I would just say, I want to meet that person and just get to know them. And I wasn't thinking of it as like building a network. I was just trying to kind of connect with people that were going through similar experiences I was going through, and hopefully I would have something to offer them. They'd have something to offer me. We'd learn from each other, that kind of thing. Those very organic conversations I started to like gain momentum to the point where we actually created what we call the EdTech CMO Collective. And we have CMOs from various EdTech companies, and we get together once a month. We have speakers every quarter. We get together at events. We talk all the time on things like Slack. We're constantly talking to each other. And what's great about it is we're all learning from each other all the time. We're all helping each other all the time. There's a real generosity there. And we compete with each other. So it's, we're not sharing trade secrets or, diving into those things, but we're all professionals, and we kind of get it. We get that these big education challenges like, literacy and these things we talked about, one company can't solve them. And so we need to start thinking collectively about how we can do that. So I'm more interested in those kinds of conversations now. Like we just had one last week, and we talked about thought leadership and talked about, well, what does that mean for a marketer, and what does it mean in our space, and how do we think about that? That kind of conversation, I would much rather have those kinds of ongoing conversations and develop those relationships with people that I trust than listen to a TED talk, or go out to dinner with celebrity CEO, you know, so that's something that is I'm continuing to be amazed by the power of that collective, and the willingness people have to be part of it, because we all are in education for similar reasons, and all of our brands do things differently, but we're all trying to accomplish the same kinds of things. So there are many opportunities for us to learn from each other, both in our roles and just, more personally and professionally.
So how big is this collective now?
Well, I think there are around 15 of us at this point. We were just talking about how we would love to double the size of it. So we've been talking about, well, how do we do that in a way that doesn't sort of compromise we've kept it really kind of small intentionally to start with, because we wanted to develop those relationships and have those deeper conversations. But we're at a point now where we kind of don't want to keep it to ourselves, and we want to expand.
In a way, it's like your own focus group on an ongoing basis, right? And actually, that number is probably ideal. Maybe you can go to 20, 25, because you want enough people to be engaged in the conversation as opposed to just being passive observers and listeners.
Yes. So yeah, we'll see where it goes. I think it's one of those things that I look forward to every month. I love to have the conversations we have, and it can even be as simple as things like, helping a former colleague who's looking for, a new challenge, that kind of thing. But more often it's these kind of bigger questions about what does it mean to be a marketer? What does it mean to be an ed tech company? How can we expand our impact, and sharing with each other how we're doing that. So yeah, it's a great thing.
I think that's great. I think others might learn from this and start their own collectives, and maybe have similar experiences. I think it's a great idea. I mean, I'm a big believer of conversations are a great way to get insights and knowledge, and keep moving forward. So, well, on that note, I appreciate you for this great conversation and insights into education and what you're up to, and I appreciate it. And thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about these things, both the marketing and the education side. Great mix. So enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks again.
All right. Thanks.
Getting to AHA was brought to you by iResearch. To find out more about us, head to iResearch.com, and make sure to search for Getting to AHA in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else podcasts are found. And don't forget to click follow to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. Thank you for listening.